My mother looked me straight in the eye and said they simply couldn't afford to buy a plane ticket for me. So my unemployed sister and her deadbeat
Subscribe.
husband got the luxury vacation to the Maldives, while I was told to stay behind and watch the house. They didn't know that the house they were leaving behind was about to be completely empty when they returned, because I was taking back every single thing I paid for. When they finally came home to a dark, hollow shell of a building, they started screaming. But by then I was already gone. And I had taken their future with me. My name is Denise, and at 31 years old, I spend my days navigating the brutal world of corporate tax law, hunting down hidden offshore accounts and exposing tax evasion schemes for Fortune 500 companies. I can trace a shell corporation through 12 different countries, but apparently I couldn't see the theft happening right under my own roof. If you've ever been treated like the family ATM instead of a daughter, hit that like button and subscribe, because I'm about to show you exactly how to cut off toxic people who see you as nothing but a paycheck. It was a sweltering Sunday afternoon in Detroit, and the air in our historic brick mansion was thick with the smell of baked mac and cheese, fried catfish, and my mother's expensive Chanel perfume. We had just come back from New Bethel Baptist, and my mother, Gloria, was still wearing her massive Sunday crown, the one with the peacock feathers that she swore made her look like royalty. To anyone looking in from the outside, we looked like black excellence, a successful family enjoying a post-service meal in one of Detroit's most prestigious neighborhoods. But the marble entryway told a different story. It was lined with 4 brand new Rimowa suitcases. The aluminum was still gleaming and perfect. I stared at them as I set the platter of cornbread on the dining table. I knew exactly how much those bags cost because the notification for the $3,200 charge had popped up on my phone 3 days ago. I had let it slide, thinking maybe it was a group purchase for the family trip we had been discussing for months. A trip to the Maldives to celebrate my parents' 32nd anniversary and my younger sister Shayla's 24th birthday. I took my seat at the table. My father, Marcus, was already eating, his head down, focused entirely on his plate. He never looked up when tension started brewing. He just chewed faster and avoided eye contact like his life depended on it. My sister Shayla was next to him, tapping furiously on her phone, probably updating her 4,000 followers about her outfit of the day. And then there was Derek, my sister's husband. He was sitting at the head of the table where my father should have been. Derek was white, tall, and hadn't held a real job in almost 4 years. But in my mother's eyes, he was the ultimate prize. She treated him like he was President Obama himself because she thought having a white son-in-law elevated our family's status in the community. Pass the greens, Denise, Derek said, without looking at me. He didn't say please. He never did. I slid the bowl across the mahogany table, another item I had paid for, and cleared my throat. So Mom, I was looking at the itinerary you emailed this morning. I didn't see my flight confirmation number attached. I assume it's coming in a separate email? The clinking of silverware stopped. My mother dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin and offered me a tight, patronizing smile, the kind she used when she was about to explain why she needed more money for the church building fund. Oh, sweetheart, she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. We need to talk about that. Your father and I sat down and looked at the numbers, and the Lord knows we tried, but the budget is just so tight this year. We simply couldn't afford a 5th ticket. I blinked slowly, processing what I'd just heard. You couldn't afford a ticket? No, baby, Gloria sighed dramatically, adjusting her feathered crown. The Maldives is expensive. We have to be good stewards of our finances. So we had to make a tough executive decision. Since Derek here is working on some very big international consulting opportunities, he really needs to be there to network. It's an investment in the family's future. So we gave him the seat. I looked at Derek. He was currently stuffing a piece of catfish into his mouth, hot sauce dripping down his chin. This was the man who was supposedly networking. His last business venture was selling counterfeit sneakers on Facebook Marketplace that fell apart after one wear. So let me get this straight, I said, my voice remaining calm and level despite the heat rising in my chest. You're taking Derek, you're taking Shayla, you're both going, and I'm the one staying behind. Well, someone has to watch the house, Shayla chimed in, finally looking up from her screen. She smirked at me, a look of pure contempt. Besides, Denise, you're always so busy with your boring lawyer job. You'd just be working on your laptop the whole time anyway. He's not a consultant, I said flatly. He's unemployed, Shayla. I snapped. He's an entrepreneur, my mother corrected me sharply, slamming her hand on the table. Don't disrespect your brother-in-law. He's going to put this family on the map. And yes, you're staying behind. We need someone to water the plants, check the mail, and make sure nobody breaks in. It's for the best, Denise. You're a workaholic anyway. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my throat, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the sound of something breaking inside me. I looked around the room at the crown molding I paid to have restored. I looked at the Swarovski chandelier I bought for my mother's birthday last year. I looked at the food on the table that I purchased with my debit card at Whole Foods yesterday afternoon. Mom, I said, lowering my voice to a dangerous whisper, who do you think pays the mortgage on this house? Gloria waved her hand dismissively. Oh, here we go again. You always bring up money, Denise. It's so unbecoming. The Bible says the love of money is the root of all evil. I'm not talking about the love of money, I said, leaning forward. I'm talking about the actual transaction of it. I pay $40 to $100 a month for the mortgage on this mansion. I pay $500 for the electricity that's keeping you cool right now. I pay for the high-speed internet Shayla uses to upload her thirst traps. I pay for the water Derek uses to take his hour-long showers. I've paid every single bill in this house for 6 years since Dad retired. And you're telling me there's no budget for me to go on a trip that I'm funding? My father flinched, but kept eating. Gloria's eyes narrowed. You help out because it's your duty, she hissed. We raised you. We put a roof over your head when you were a child. Honor your father and mother, Denise. Don't throw numbers in my face. You make plenty of money with that fancy job of yours. You should be happy to bless your family. I am happy to bless my family, I said, standing up, my hands shaking slightly. But I'm not happy to be used. You bought 4 Rimowa suitcases 3 days ago, Mom. That's $30 to $100. That's more than the price of a plane ticket. You prioritized luggage over your own daughter. Those were necessary, Gloria shouted, standing up to match me. We can't go to the Maldives looking like we're poor. We represent this family, and Derek needs to look successful to attract investors. You're being selfish, Denise. Jealous and selfish. Just because you can't keep a man, don't take it out on your sister, who actually knows how to make a husband happy. The room went silent. That was the low blow she always saved for last. My single status. In my mother's world, being a corporate tax attorney making $200,000 a year was nothing if I didn't have a ring on my finger. Shayla giggled and held up her phone. She was live streaming. Say hi to my bitter sister, guys, she said to the camera, pouting her lips. She's mad she has to babysit the house while we live our best lives in the Maldives. Hashtag family drama. Hashtag Maldives ready. I looked at the red recording dot on her phone. I looked at Derek, who was now grinning at me, wiping his hands on the tablecloth I had bought. I looked at my father, who was shrinking into his chair, trying to become invisible. And finally, I looked at my mother, who stood there with her chin raised, righteous and indignant in her ridiculous peacock crown. They really thought this was just another argument. They thought I would yell for a few minutes, cry in my room, and then go back to paying the bills like a good, obedient daughter. They had no idea that the corporate tax attorney in me had just been activated. I wasn't looking at my family anymore. I was looking at a liability. I was looking at bad debt that needed to be written off. Fine, I said, smoothing down my skirt. My voice was eerily calm now, the anger settling into a cold, hard resolve. You're right, Mom. I shouldn't be selfish. You guys go to the Maldives. Have the time of your lives. I'll stay here. I'll watch the house. I'll take care of everything. Gloria let out a breath and smiled, triumphant. See, I knew you'd understand, baby. It's just logistics. Next time we'll take you. I promise. Now sit down and finish your catfish before it gets cold. I'm not hungry, I said, turning toward the stairs. I have some work to do. I walked out of the dining room, listening to them immediately return to their conversation about overwater bungalows and sunset cruises. I walked up the stairs to my room, not to cry, but to plan. They wanted me to watch the house. Oh, I was going to watch it all right. I was going to watch it burn to the ground, metaphorically speaking. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dim room. I logged into my bank account. Then I logged into the credit card portal. And then I started digging, because if they couldn't afford a ticket for me, I needed to see exactly how they were affording first-class tickets for themselves. What I found in the next 2 hours would make me wish I had left years ago. But it also gave me the ammunition I needed to end this charade once and for all. The dinner was over. The audit had begun. The house was finally quiet. The remote suitcases were packed and staged by the front door like monuments to my family's greed. Upstairs, I could hear my father's snores rattling the floorboards. But down here in the kitchen, the only sound was the hum of the smart refrigerator I had bought last Christmas. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand steady now. The initial shock from dinner had faded, replaced by a focused, icy clarity. I wasn't sad. I was calculating. I was remembering every receipt, every bill. Every time my mother had said God will provide right after I handed her a check. As I turned to head back up to my room, a sliver of light from the downstairs bathroom caught my eye. The door was cracked open just an inch, and hushed voices drifted out. It was Derek and Shayla. They thought everyone was asleep. They thought they were safe. I moved closer, stepping silently on the plush runner rug. I pressed my back against the wall, holding my breath. "Did you see her face?" Derek whispered, followed by a low chuckle. She actually thought she was going. Poor Denise, always the bridesmaid, never the bride. Or in this case, never even invited to the wedding reception. "She's so pathetic," Shayla giggled. "But seriously, babe, are you sure she won't notice the upgrade? 30,000 is a lot of money, even for her." I froze. My grip on the water glass tightened until my knuckles turned white. $30,000. Relax, babe, Derek said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "She never checks that card. It's the one she gave your mom for groceries and emergencies. I just added myself as an authorized user 2 weeks ago when she left her purse on the counter. Easy peasy. Besides, she makes so much money doing taxes for those big corporations, she won't even feel it." "But what if she sees the alert?" Shayla asked, a hint of nervousness in her voice. "Not for me, but for herself. She won't," Derek assured her. "I changed the notification settings on her account when I got access. By the time she figures it out, we'll be sipping champagne in an overwater villa. And what's she going to do anyway? Sue her own mother? She's too weak. She's just a dumb black ATM who thinks buying us stuff will make us love her." The slur hung in the air, heavy and toxic. My heart hammered against my ribs, not with fear, but with a rage so pure it felt like electricity coursing through my veins. He called me a dumb black ATM. This man who lived in my house, ate my food, and slept in the bed I paid for. And then came the final blow. "Mom knows, right?" Shayla asked. "Of course she knows," Derek scoffed. "Gloria is the one who gave me the idea. She said Denise owes you guys for all the sacrifices they made raising her. She said it's reparations for being the favorite child who got to go to college." I closed my eyes. My mother knew. She not only knew, she orchestrated it. She greenlit the theft of $30,000 from her own daughter to fund a first-class fantasy for a man she barely knew 2 years ago. All the sacrifices. What sacrifices? I put myself through law school with scholarships and student loans. I was still paying off. I bought this house so they wouldn't lose their home after Dad's pension got cut. I was the sacrifice. I didn't storm in there. I didn't kick the door open and scream. That's what the old Denise would have done. The emotional Denise who just wanted to be heard. The corporate tax attorney Denise knew better. You don't tip off the suspect while they're still incriminating themselves. You let them dig the hole deeper. I turned around and walked back up the stairs, my steps silent and deliberate. I went into my room and locked the door. I set the water glass down on my coaster and opened my laptop again. The screen illuminated my face in the darkness. I logged into my bank portal. My fingers flew across the keyboard. There it was. Pending transaction. Maldives Airways. $29,850. 4 first-class seats. Another charge for the STT. Regis Maldives. $6,000 deposit. They had maxed it out. They had nearly drained the credit limit on my platinum card. I stared at the numbers. They weren't just numbers anymore. They were a declaration of war. They were the price of my freedom. Most people would call the bank right then. They would scream fraud. They would cancel the cards. But I paused. If I canceled it now, the transaction would be declined. They would be stuck here. They would come up with some lie, some sob story about how it was a mistake or how they would pay me back. My mother would cry. My father would beg, and I would be trapped in this cycle of guilt and manipulation for another year. No, that was too easy. They wanted to go to the Maldives. They wanted the first-class experience. They wanted to live like royalty on my dime. I sat back in my chair, and a slow, cold smile spread across my face. It was the smile of a predator who just realized the prey walked into the trap. Okay, I whispered to the empty room. You want to play big? Let's play big. You want the luxury life? Go ahead, take it. Enjoy the champagne. Enjoy the lie-flat seats, because when you land, that cart is going to turn into a pumpkin. And I'm going to be the one holding the glass slipper. I didn't cancel the transaction. I let it process. I approved it. Have a safe flight, I murmured, closing the laptop. Because it's going to be a very long walk home, I crawled into bed, but I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around me. Every creak, every groan of the old mansion sounded different now. It didn't sound like home anymore. It sounded like collateral. Tomorrow morning, I would drive them to the airport. I would hug them. I would wave goodbye. And then the real work would begin. They thought they were leaving me behind. They had no idea they were setting me free. The audit was done. Now it was time for the liquidation. The sun was barely rising over Detroit when I pulled my car into the international departures lane at Detroit Metropolitan Airport. The air conditioning was blasting, but the back of my neck was slick with sweat, not from heat, but from the sheer effort of keeping my composure. I had spent the last 7 hours mentally rehearsing this moment. Get the bags. Denise. Derek barked from the back seat, kicking open the door. He didn't even look at me. He just stood on the curb, stretching his arms like he had just conquered a marathon. Instead of sleeping the entire 50-minute drive while I navigated morning traffic, I popped the trunk and got out. My father Marcus stumbled out of the passenger seat, looking disheveled and anxious, clutching his passport like a lifeline. Shayla was already busy taking selfies against the backdrop of the terminal sign, adjusting her sunglasses even though it was barely dawn. Make sure you don't scratch the aluminum. Denise, Shayla called out as I hauled the first heavy suitcase onto the curb. These are investments. I gritted my teeth and lifted the second bag, then the third, and finally the fourth. They stood there watching me, 4 able-bodied adults treating me like their personal porter. I lined up the bags neatly on the sidewalk. Okay, Mom, I said, dusting off my hands. You guys are all set. Gloria adjusted her crown, checking her reflection in the tinted window of my car. She turned to me, her face set in that familiar mask of pious judgment. Now, Denise, listen to me carefully. While we're gone, I expect you to keep the house spotless. The lawn service is coming on Wednesday. Make sure they edge the sidewalk properly this time. And wash the curtains in the living room. They're looking dingy. I nodded, my expression blank. Sure, Mom. Curtains. Got it. And one more thing, she added, leaning in close, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Don't think just because we're gone you can turn my house into a party zone. No men, Denise. I don't want any strange men defiling the sanctuary of the Lord. You understand me? Keep your legs closed and your Bible open. I almost laughed. The sanctuary of the Lord was currently funded by fraud and sustained by my paycheck, but I kept my face neutral. Don't worry, Mom, I said. There won't be any men. Just me. Derek walked over, slinging his carry-on bag over his shoulder. He grinned at me, a cocky, lopsided smile that made my skin crawl. Thanks for the ride, Denise, he said, giving my shoulder a patronizing pat. You're a lifesaver. Seriously? Don't be too jealous, okay? We'll bring you back something nice. Maybe a snow globe or a magnet. A snow globe. $30,000 of my money, and he was going to bring me a snow globe. You're too generous. Derek, I said, my voice flat. Well, we better get going, Shayla said, linking her arm through Derek's. The lounge awaits. Mimosa time. My father gave me a quick, awkward hug. Be safe, Denise. Call us if anything happens. I looked at him, at the man who had let his wife and son-in-law walk all over me for years. I felt a twinge of pity, but I crushed it. Pity was a luxury I could no longer afford. I turned to my mother. She was already looking toward the terminal entrance, eager to leave me behind. Mom, wait, I said, stepping into her path. She sighed, impatient. What is it now, Denise? We're going to be late. I hugged her. It was stiff and unyielding on her end, but I held on for a second longer than necessary. I leaned down and whispered directly into her ear. Have a safe flight, Mom. Enjoy the Maldives. Really enjoy it. Because this is the last time. She pulled back sharply, frowning at me. What's that supposed to mean? Don't speak negativity over my trip, girl. You and your bad attitude. It wasn't negativity, Mom, I said, stepping back and unlocking my car door. It was a promise. She huffed, shook her head, and turned around, marching toward the automatic doors without looking back. Shayla and Derek followed, laughing at something on Shayla's phone. My father trailed behind them, head down as always. I watched them go. I watched them disappear into the terminal, into the air conditioning and the promise of luxury. I waited until the glass doors slid shut behind them, sealing them into their fate. Then I got back into my car. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I adjusted the rearview mirror, put on my sunglasses, and put the car in drive. I didn't go home. Going home was for people who had something to return to. I had a crime scene to process. I drove straight to downtown Detroit. I pulled into the parking garage of a sleek glass building and took the elevator to the 22nd floor. The sign on the door read Morrison and Hayes, attorneys at law. I didn't have an appointment, but when you're about to liquidate an entire life, lawyers tend to make time. After that, I made one more stop. A warehouse supply store on the outskirts of the city. I walked down the aisles pushing a flatbed cart. I loaded it up. 60 heavy-duty moving boxes, 12 rolls of packing tape, bubble wrap, markers. The cashier looked at my haul. Moving someone out? He asked, popping his gum. Something like that, I replied, swiping my card. Just doing a little spring cleaning. I drove back to the mansion. The house was silent when I unlocked the front door. The air was still cool and smelled of my mother's potpourri. It felt like a museum, a shrine to a family that didn't exist. I kicked off my heels and changed into sneakers. I tied my hair back. I picked up a roll of tape, and the sound of it ripping off the dispenser was loud in the empty hallway. It sounded like a starting gun. The family was gone. The flight was in the air, and the demolition was about to begin. I walked back into the mansion, and the silence hit me like a physical weight. It wasn't the peaceful silence of an empty home. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a crime scene waiting to be processed. I locked the door behind me and threw the deadbolt. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a daughter returning to her parents' house. I felt like an auditor walking into a failing corporation on the brink of collapse. I kicked off my sneakers and walked straight to the back of the house, to my father's study. It was a dark room, smelling of lemon polish and the cheap cigars he liked to smoke when he wanted to feel important. He called this his office, but no real work ever happened here. It was just a room where he hid from my mother and pretended to manage the family finances. I moved the heavy oak chair aside and knelt on the Persian rug. There it was, the wall safe. I had installed it for him 6 years ago when I started making real money, because he said he needed a secure place for the deed and the insurance papers. He thought he was the only one who knew the combination. But he had forgotten that I was the one who programmed it. I typed in the digits. 061519. June 15, 2019. The date Shayla won a local pageant. Of course, that would be the code. Not my law school graduation date. Not his wedding anniversary. The day his golden child won a plastic crown. The mechanism whirred, and the heavy door swung open. Inside was a chaos of papers stuffed in without order. Typical. I pulled everything out and carried the stack to the desk. I turned on the banker's lamp and took a deep breath. It was time to go to work. Corporate tax law is about patterns. It's about looking at what's there to find what's missing. I sorted the documents into piles: tax returns, insurance policies, car titles. And then I reached for the file marked mortgage. I opened it, expecting to see the standard amortization schedule. I knew the numbers by heart. I sent my father $4,200 on the first of every month. That covered the mortgage payment with about $600 left over for utilities. I had been doing this like clockwork for 6 years. The principal should have been paid down significantly by now, but when I looked at the most recent statement, my blood ran cold. The principal balance was wrong. It wasn't lower. It was higher, much higher. I frowned and dug deeper into the pile. I found a document dated 3 years ago. It was a cash-out refinance agreement. My hand shook slightly as I traced the numbers. They had refinanced the house. They had reset the loan term and pulled out $200,000 in equity. I stared at the date. 3 years ago. That was exactly when Derek had announced he was launching his revolutionary crypto investment platform. The one that never launched. The one that disappeared along with the investors' money. Except there were no investors, were there? The investor was this house. The investor was my grandmother's legacy. They had stripped the equity out of my inheritance to fund a white man's fantasy, but the horror didn't stop there. I kept digging. I found a stack of unopened envelopes at the very bottom of the safe, shoved back as if hiding them would make them disappear. They were from the bank. The envelopes were stamped with urgent red letters: final notice, notice of default, intent to foreclose. I ripped them open one by one. Past due, past due, past due. They hadn't paid the mortgage in 5 months. I sat back in the chair, feeling the room spin. 5 months. That was $21,000. I had sent them the money. I had the transfer receipts on my phone. On the first of every month, I sent them the cash. I did the math in my head. 5 months of mortgage payments, plus the utilities. I paid separately, plus the groceries, plus the incidentals. They had taken my money, the money earmarked to keep a roof over their heads, and they had pocketed it. Suddenly, the first-class tickets to the Maldives made sense. The Rimowa luggage made sense. They weren't just bad with money. They were thieves. They had taken my mortgage payments and used them to fund their lifestyle while letting the house slide toward the cliff edge. I looked at the latest letter. It was dated last week. The house was in pre-foreclosure. The bank was preparing to auction it off if the arrears weren't brought current within 45 days. My mother had looked me in the face yesterday and told me to watch the house. She told me to check the mail and water the plants. She wanted me to act like a caretaker for a property she had already destroyed. She was off sipping champagne at 30,000 feet while the sheriff was probably printing out the eviction notice. I looked around the study, the mahogany desk, the leather-bound books, the framed photos of Shayla. It was all a lie. This house was a hollow shell. It was a corpse, and they were just picking the meat off the bones before they ran. They thought I would just fix it. That was their plan. They knew eventually the bank would come calling, and they figured Denise would step in. Denise would pay the arrears. Denise would save the day, because Denise loved the house. They were betting on my loyalty to cover their theft. I picked up the foreclosure notice. My fingers traced the bold black letters. A cold, dark amusement bubbled up in my chest. They wanted to play games with finances. They wanted to treat me like a bank. Well, they forgot one thing. Banks foreclose. I wasn't going to save them. I wasn't going to pay the arrears and beg them to be better. I was going to let the hammer drop, but not before I secured my own position. I looked at the refinance documents again. I saw the name of the lender. It was a smaller regional bank, the kind that sells off its bad debt for pennies on the dollar just to get it off the books. I knew that bank. I knew their vice president of loss mitigation. We had worked together on a corporate tax evasion case 2 years ago. I pulled out my phone. It was Sunday, but this couldn't wait. I'm not just watching the house, Mom. I whispered to the empty room. I'm repossessing it. The audit was complete. The evidence was irrefutable. They had stolen my money and leveraged my future. Now it was time for the acquisition. I closed the safe, but I didn't lock it. There was no point in protecting anything in this house anymore. The real value wasn't in the safe. It was in the debt, and I was about to become the owner of that debt. I stood up and walked out of the study, leaving the papers scattered across the desk. Let the ghosts of their bad decisions haunt that room. I had a phone call to make and a limited liability company to form. By the time they landed in the Maldives, I wouldn't be their daughter anymore. I would be their creditor, and I was going to be a very merciless one. The house was quiet, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't empty anymore. It was mine. I sat at the kitchen table, the laptop screen glowing with wire transfer confirmations. I had spent the last 3 hours on the phone with my contact at the bank, negotiating the purchase of the distressed mortgage. The conversation had been surprisingly simple. The bank was hemorrhaging money on non-performing loans. They were thrilled to offload a toxic asset to a buyer with clean capital and no emotional attachment. I had purchased my parents' mortgage for 68 cents on the dollar. The outstanding balance was for $195,000. I paid $337,000. My entire life savings, gone in a single click. But in exchange, I held the most powerful weapon imaginable. I owned the paper on their house. They didn't know it yet. But they were now tenants in a property owned by Karma Holdings LC, a company I had incorporated 2 hours ago using my law firm's registered agent service. I stood up and walked into the living room. I looked at the furniture, the heavy drapes my mother loved, the velvet armchair Derek claimed as his throne. It all looked different through the eyes of a creditor. These weren't family heirlooms. They were collateral, and collateral that was currently depreciating. I went back to the study and picked up the phone. It was time to execute the next phase. I dialed the number for a contact I hadn't spoken to in for years. Her name was Rachel, and she worked in the loss mitigation department at the regional bank, the same bank I had just bought the debt from. We had gone to law school together, bonded over late-night study sessions and terrible cafeteria coffee. She owed me a favor for helping her pass the bar exam. Rachel, I said when she picked up, it's Denise. I need you to confirm something for me, off the record. Denise, it's been forever, she said, her voice warm but guarded. What's going on? I just bought a note from your bank through an entity called Karma Holdings, I said, keeping my voice professional. Loan number ending in 7841. I need to know the internal status classification. There was a pause, the sound of typing. Hold on. Okay, I see it. It was flagged as a toxic asset. 150 days past due. No communication from the borrower. We were preparing to sell it to a bulk debt buyer next month. You beat them to it. Toxic asset, I repeated. The words tasted like ash. My childhood home, my family's legacy, reduced to a toxic asset because my mother wanted to impress a man who didn't even have a job. Why are you buying this junk, Denise? Rachel asked, her voice lowering. This borrower is a ghost. We tried calling, sending letters. Nothing. They've essentially walked away. You're buying a headache. I'm not buying a headache, Rachel, I said, staring at the foreclosure notice on the desk. I'm buying leverage. Thanks for the info. I hung up. The confirmation was the final nail in the coffin. The bank had given up. They viewed my parents as a lost cause, which meant I didn't have to feel guilty about what I was about to do. I wasn't destroying a happy home. I was just the one cleaning up the mess. I looked at the clock. It was barely noon. The locksmith would be here in an hour. But before he arrived, I had one more piece of business. I needed to formalize my position. I opened a new document on my laptop. I typed the header, Karma Holdings LLC. Below that, I typed Notice of Default and Acceleration. I drafted the letter with the precision of a surgeon. I cited the missed payments. I cited the failure to maintain insurance. I cited the abandonment of the property. And then I typed the line that would end their world. Pursuant to the terms of the mortgage note, the lender hereby exercises its option to accelerate the maturity of the debt. The entire principal balance of $495,000 is due and payable immediately. I printed it out. The paper felt heavy in my hand. This wasn't just a letter. It was an eviction notice disguised as a bill. I walked to the front door and taped the envelope to the inside of the glass storm door, facing out. When they dragged their luggage up the steps into weeks, tired and jet-lagged, this would be the first thing they saw. A welcome home gift from their new landlord. But I wasn't done. Owning the debt was just the foundation. To truly sweep the board, I needed to make sure there was nothing left for them to come back to. I walked into the living room and looked at the 85-inch television mounted on the wall. I bought that for the Super Bowl party Derek insisted on hosting last year. I looked at the soundbar. Mine. The gaming console. Mine. I went to the kitchen. The Vitamix blender. The espresso machine. The entire set of Le Creuset cookware. All purchased with my card. All under my name. I went upstairs to Shayla's room. The walk-in closet was overflowing. Designer bags, shoes, clothes with tags still on them. I pulled out my phone and checked my credit card statements from the last 8 months. There they were. Transaction after transaction. Sephora, Nordstrom, Gucci, all charged to the card I paid off every month. Technically, these were gifts. But legally, if I could prove they were purchased with funds obtained through fraud like adding an unauthorized user, then they were proceeds of a crime. Or simpler yet, I could just take them. Who were they going to call? The police? And tell them what? That they stole my credit card to buy them? I smiled. It was time for the clean sweep. I went to the garage and grabbed the stack of heavy-duty boxes I had bought. I unfolded the first one and taped the bottom shut. The sound of the tape gun was the only noise in the house. I started in the living room. I didn't pack carefully. I wasn't moving, friends. I was repossessing assets. The Xbox went into a box. The controllers followed. The expensive throw pillows. The art on the walls that I had commissioned. I worked with a mechanical efficiency. Box after box filled up. I labeled them with a thick black marker, property of Denise Williams. By the time the locksmith arrived, the living room was bare. The television was down, leaving a dusty rectangle on the wall. The shelves were empty. The rug was rolled up. The locksmith, a burly man named Mike, looked around the empty room. "Moving out?" he asked. "Something like that," I said. "I need the locks changed. Front door, back door, garage. And I need a smart lock installed on the front. One that I can control from my phone." "You got it," Mike said. Getting to work.as, he drilled into the doorframe, destroying the old lock that my father had installed 20 years ago. I felt a strange sense of detachment. I wasn't destroying my home. I was fortifying my fortress. When Mike was finished, I tested the new smart lock. It beeped cheerfully, and the deadbolt slid home with a solid thunk. I opened the app on my phone. Front door locked. Access code, Denise only. I paid Mike and watched him drive away. I was alone in the house again. But now I was the only one who could get in. I walked back to the pile of boxes. I had cleared the living room and kitchen. Now it was time for the bedrooms. I walked up the stairs, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the hollow house. I stopped in front of Shayla's door. This was going to be the most satisfying part. I pushed the door open and looked at the shrine to consumerism my sister had built on my dime. "Don't worry, Shayla," I whispered. "I'm going to take good care of your things. I'm going to sell them to pay myself back for the first-class ticket you stole." I grabbed a box and started pulling purses off the shelf. The clean sweep had officially begun, and I wasn't leaving a single crumb behind. I stood before the door to the master bedroom, the one my parents had given up to Shayla and Derek, because Derek said he needed the extra square footage for his meditation practice. I pushed the door open and was immediately hit by the smell of stale cologne and unwashed laundry. The room was a disaster zone. Clothes were strewn everywhere, rejected outfits that didn't make the cut for the Maldives. But I wasn't here to clean. I was here to dig. Sitting on the nightstand, amidst empty energy drink cans and half-eaten protein bars, was Derek's laptop. It was a bulky gaming model, the kind with neon lights that hummed like a jet engine. He hadn't taken it with him, probably because he had the brand new iPad Pro I had bought for Shayla's birthday tucked into his carry-on. I sat down on the edge of the unmade bed and opened the lid. The screen flickered to life, demanding a password. I didn't even have to use my cracking software. I knew Derek. He was a narcissist with zero imagination. I tried his Instagram handle first. Incorrect. Then I tried his license plate. Incorrect. Then I typed in Shayla's name. Incorrect. Finally, I typed in entrepreneur with a capital. Access granted. I almost laughed out loud. The man who claimed to be a tech visionary protected his digital life with a dictionary word. I navigated straight to his email client. If you want to know who a person really is, don't look at their social media. Look at their sent folder and their trash. I started with the business folder. Derek had spent the last 4 years talking about his blockchain logistics startup. He claimed he was in talks with investors in Silicon Valley. I scrolled through months of emails. There were no investors. There were no business plans. The only business correspondence I found were automated rejection emails from entry-level sales jobs and a few angry messages from customers on eBay asking why their used sneakers hadn't shipped yet. His empire was a delusion built on resale apps and lies. But then I saw a folder marked legal. My auditor's instinct prickled. I clicked it open. It wasn't patent applications or incorporation documents. It was a stream of notifications from the Wisconsin Department of Children and Families. Subject line, notice of default. Subject line, child support arrears. Subject line, bench warrant warning. I opened the most recent one. It was addressed to Derek J. Miller regarding 3 minor children. 3, not 1. 3 different mothers. He owed over $55,000 in back child support. He was dodging court dates. He was hiding income. That was why he had no bank account in his own name. That was why he used my credit cards. He was hiding from the state of Wisconsin to avoid paying for his own children while he lived like a king in my house. My hands flew across the keyboard, taking screenshots, downloading attachments. This was gold. But I wasn't done. I minimized the email and opened his browser history. It was a roadmap of infidelity dating sites, escort forums, and an open chat window for a messaging app I didn't recognize. I clicked it. The chat history loaded. It wasn't Shayla he was messaging. It was a woman named Amber, and another named Crystal, and a third named Destiny. I read the messages, my stomach turning. He was sending them photos of himself in the first-class lounge, the photos Shayla had taken of him. He was telling them he was a wealthy investor traveling for business. He promised to fly them out to Miami when he got back. He was texting them, describing things he wanted to do to them, things he probably hadn't done to my sister in years. He was cheating on Shayla while sitting next to her on a plane. I paid for. I felt a strange mix of disgust and triumph. Shayla had called me bitter. She had mocked me for being single. But her husband, her prize, was a deadbeat dad with a wandering eye and a mountain of debt. I connected the laptop to the wireless printer in the hallway. I hit print on everything. The child support notices, the bench warrants, the rejection letters, the texts. The printer whirred to life, spitting out page after page of incriminating evidence. I watched the stack grow. It was thick, heavy. It was a dossier of destruction. I took a heavy-duty stapler and bound the pages together. I would leave a copy of this on the kitchen counter for Shayla to find when she eventually crawled back here. But that was for later. Right now, I had a more immediate move to make. I went back to the legal emails and found the contact information for the caseworker in Wisconsin. But better yet, I found an email chain with one of the mothers. Her name was Jennifer. She had sent him a pleading email 3 weeks ago, asking for just $75 to buy school supplies for their daughter. Derek had replied that he was broke and to stop harassing him. Broke. While sitting on a $30,000 flight, I opened a new incognito browser window and created a throwaway email address. I typed Jennifer's address into the recipient field. Subject: Derek Miller, location and a sets buddy. Hello Jennifer, you don't know me, but I know you're looking for Derek. You should know that he's currently traveling to the Maldives on a first-class ticket. He has access to significant funds and is posting his location publicly on social media. He's not broke, he's hiding. Here are the flight details and his return itinerary. I suggest you contact the authorities. He lands in New York on the return leg. Happy hunting. I attached a screenshot of the flight confirmation and a photo of Derek popping champagne in the lounge. I hit send. I sat back and watched the sent confirmation fade from the screen. The game had changed. I wasn't just cutting off his money anymore. I was cutting off his freedom. When Derek landed back on American soil, he wouldn't just be homeless. He would be a fugitive. I closed the laptop and wiped my fingerprints from the keys. I picked up the thick stack of printed evidence and walked out of the room. The air in the house felt lighter already. The rot had been exposed. Now it was just a matter of waiting for the bleach to do its work. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the hours until dawn labeling everything with color-coded stickers. Green for mine, red for trash. There were a lot of green stickers. By the time the sun came up, I had tagged almost every piece of furniture in the house. At 8 o'clock sharp, a massive white truck pulled up to the curb. The logo on the side read Titan Movers. I had hired them because they advertised discretion and speed. 4 men in uniforms hopped out. The foreman, a guy named Rick with a clipboard, walked up to the porch. "Morning, ma'am," he said, eyeing the mountain of boxes I had already staged in the foyer. "We're here for the full pack and move." "Good morning, Rick," I said, handing him a thick binder. "This is the inventory. Everything with a green sticker goes. Everything else stays. Be careful with the electronics. I have the receipts for everything in here if you need to verify ownership. But I'm the only name on the lease for the storage unit." Rick flipped through the binder, raising an eyebrow at the itemized list. "You're thorough." "I'm a lawyer," I said. "Accuracy is my job." They started in the living room. The first thing to go was the 85-inch television. I watched as they unscrewed the mounting bracket from the wall, leaving 4 ugly holes in the plaster. Derek loved that TV. He spent hours shouting at video games on it while I was working upstairs. Now it was just a black rectangle being wrapped in a moving blanket. Next was the Italian leather sectional. I had bought it 4 years ago when my mother complained that her old sofa hurt her back. It cost $7,000. I watched as they separated the pieces and carried them out the front door. The space where it sat was suddenly vast and empty, revealing the scuff marks on the hardwood floor that had been hidden for years. Then they moved to the kitchen. This was my favorite part. The smart refrigerator with the touchscreen. The one Shayla used to check her Instagram while she was supposedly looking up recipes. It took 3 men to maneuver it out the back door. They replaced it with nothing. Just an empty alcove and a water line sticking out of the wall like a severed artery. The washer and dryer set, the Dyson vacuum, the Vitamix, the Le Creuset Dutch oven. It all went into the truck. I was stripping the house down to its bones.
Subscribe.
I went upstairs while they were loading the heavy items. I walked into my parents' bedroom, the king-size adjustable bed with the memory foam mattress. I bought that for their anniversary 3 years ago. I stripped the sheets off, revealing the pristine mattress cover. "Take it," I told the movers when they came up, frame and all. "But ma'am," one of the movers hesitated, looking around the room. "What are they going to sleep on?" I pointed to the corner where a lumpy, dusty twin mattress was leaned against the wall. "That one. That's the one they brought from their old apartment 20 years ago. It's the only thing in this room I didn't buy." They shrugged and started dismantling the bed frame. It took them 5 hours to clear the house. When they were done, I walked through the rooms one last time. The living room was just a dusty floor. The kitchen was a counter and a stove that I legally couldn't take because it was built in. The bedrooms were empty except for a few piles of old clothes and broken furniture that belonged to my parents. It looked like a squatter's den. It looked like poverty. It looked like the truth. This was what they had without me. This was their reality before I started subsidizing their fantasies. A hollow house filled with nothing but dust and bad decisions. I stood in the center of the living room, listening to the silence. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a vacuum. I had sucked the life out of this place. I had taken back my labor, my sweat, my sacrifice. Rick walked in, holding his clipboard. "That's everything on the list, ma'am. The truck is full. We're heading to the storage facility now. You want to do a final walkthrough?" "No need," I said. "I trust your work." I signed the paperwork and handed him a tip. He tipped his cap and walked out. I heard the truck engine roar to life and the heavy gears grind as it pulled away from the curb. I was alone in the empty house. I looked at the walls. There were rectangles of lighter paint where my art had hung. There were indentations in the carpet where my furniture had sat. They were ghosts of the life I had provided. I walked to the thermostat and turned it off. I walked to the breaker box and flipped the main switch. The hum of the house died. No more electricity. No more internet. No more comfort. I walked out the front door and locked it with the new smart lock. I stood on the porch and looked at the house one last time. It looked dark and foreboding. It looked like a tomb. When they came back from the Maldives, tired and jet-lagged, expecting to collapse onto their soft beds and turn on the TV, they were going to walk into a cave. They were going to walk into the darkness they had created. I got into my car and drove away. I didn't look back. Phase 1 was complete. The assets were secured. Now it was time to let them land. The clean sweep was finished. It was Tuesday morning in Detroit, but it was Tuesday night in the Maldives. I sat at my kitchen table in my temporary rental apartment, a laptop open in front of me. On the screen was the real-time transaction log for my platinum credit card. I watched as the charges rolled in like waves. A $600 spa treatment, an $800 yacht rental deposit, $1,500 at a jewelry boutique. They were burning through my credit limit with the reckless abandon of people who had never paid a bill in their lives. I picked up my phone and dialed the number on the back of my debit card. It was time to cut the cord. "Thank you for calling Platinum Services. This is Jennifer. How may I help you today?" The voice on the other end chirped. "Hi, Jennifer," I said, my voice calm and professional. "My name is Denise Williams. I need to report some unauthorized activity on my account. Actually, I need to report that my cards have been stolen." "Oh no, I'm so sorry to hear that," Jennifer said, her typing audible in the background. "Let's get those secured for you immediately. Do you know when they went missing?" "I believe they were taken 4 days ago," I said, "by family members who had access to my home. I see a lot of international charges coming through from the Maldives. Those are not mine. I'm currently in Michigan." "I understand, ma'am," Jennifer said. "I'm flagging all international transactions as fraudulent right now. I'm also freezing the primary account and all authorized user cards associated with it. This will take effect immediately." "Thank you, Jennifer," I said. "Please make sure the fraud alert is noted." I did not authorize any of these charges. I hung up the phone and took a sip of coffee. It was done. The digital guillotine had dropped. Now I just had to wait for the scream. Thousands of miles away, in the shimmering heat of the Maldives, my family was sitting in a restaurant called Sub-6. It was located underwater at the Paraquam Resort, surrounded by a massive aquarium. Tropical fish and manta rays glided past their table as they feasted on lobster and Wagyu beef. I knew this because Shayla had posted a story 12 minutes ago, captioning it, "Living my best life while the haters rot at home." The bill arrived on a silver tray. It was $2,500. Derek laughed, loud and performative, probably making a joke about how cheap it was compared to his usual lifestyle. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the heavy metal card. My card, the one with his name printed on it, but my social security number tied to the debt. He tossed it onto the tray without even looking at the total. Keep the change, he probably said to the waiter, feeling like a king. I imagined the waiter walking away, the anticipation of a big tip putting a bounce in his step. I imagined him sliding the card into the machine. And then I imagined the machine beeping a harsh, unyielding tone. Declined. Code 05. Do not honor. The waiter would have frowned. He would have wiped the chip and tried again. Declined. He would have walked back to the table, his smile a little tighter. Sir, I'm afraid there's a problem with the card. It's been declined. Derek would have been indignant. That's impossible. He would sputter loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. Run it again. Your machine must be broken. That's a platinum card. The waiter would have tried again, right there at the table. Beep. Declined. Try this one, Shayla would say, pulling out her own card, the authorized user card I had given her for emergencies. Gloria would be looking around nervously, adjusting her crown, hoping no one noticed the commotion. Marcus would be staring at the fish, wishing he could swim away. The waiter took Shayla's card. Beep. Declined. Now the manager was coming over. In the Maldives, unpaid debts aren't just a civil matter. They're taken very seriously. You can face detention for failing to pay a bill. The manager, a stern man in a suit, would not be smiling. Is there a problem here, sir? He would ask, his voice carrying the weight of authority. Your machines are trash, Derek would shout, standing up and causing a scene, because that's what Derek does when he's cornered. I have millions in the bank. Do you know who I am? I don't care who you are. The manager would reply coldly. I care that you've consumed $2,500 worth of food and drink, and you have no means to pay for it. If you cannot settle this bill immediately, I will have no choice but to call security. Security. The word would have cut through the arrogance like a knife. Gloria would have gasped, clutching her purse. Shayla would have stopped recording. My father. Marcus realized the gravity of the situation. He knew Derek had no money. He knew Shayla had no money. He looked at his wife, who was frozen in shock. How much cash do we have? Marcus whispered frantically, digging into his pockets. Gloria opened her purse. I only have $60, she hissed. I thought we were putting everything on the card. Marcus pulled out his wallet. He had $400 in emergency cash he had hidden from my mother. It wasn't enough, not even close. The manager was tapping his foot. Security guards were starting to drift toward the table. The fish circled in. The tank behind them, silent witnesses to their humiliation. Please, Marcus stammered, his hands shaking. There must be a mistake with the bank. We can sort this out. We're good people. You have 5 minutes, the manager said, crossing his arms, or you're going to be detained until this is resolved. Marcus looked at Derek, who was suddenly very interested in the tablecloth. He looked at Shayla, who was on the verge of tears. He realized he was the only one who could save them. He took off his watch. It was a gold Rolex, a retirement gift to himself that he had saved for 25 years to buy. It was the only thing of real value he owned. Here, Marcus said, his voice breaking as he unclasped the band. Take this. It's worth $6,000. Please, just let us go. The manager examined the watch. He held it up to the light, checking the movement. He looked at the terrified family huddled around the table. Fine, he sneered, snatching the cash from the table and pocketing the watch. Get out, and don't come back. They scrambled out of the restaurant, creating a scene of pathetic retreat. My father walked with his head down, his wrists bare and light. Derek was already blaming the bank, blaming the internet, blaming everyone but himself. The automatic doors of the resort hotel slid open at 2 in the morning, and my family was escorted out onto the curb like common criminals. The humidity of the Maldivian night hit them instantly, a suffocating blanket of heat that made their expensive clothes cling to their skin. Behind them, the golden lights of the lobby glowed warm and inviting, a paradise they were now barred from entering. The security guards, 2 massive men who looked like they were carved out of granite, placed the 4 Rimowa suitcases on the sidewalk with a finality that echoed in the quiet night. They didn't throw them. That would have been unprofessional. They simply set them down and stood there, arms crossed, blocking the entrance. The message was clear. You are not welcome here. My mother, Gloria, stood there in her peacock crown, which was now slightly askew, clutching her purse to her chest. She looked small. For the first time in my life, she looked small. The imperious woman who ruled our household with scripture and guilt was gone, replaced by a bewildered tourist stranded in a foreign land. This can't be happening, she muttered, looking back at the hotel doors. They can't just throw us out. We're Americans. They just did, Mom. Shayla sobbed from her spot on the curb. She was sitting on one of the suitcases, her face buried in her hands. Her makeup was running, leaving black streaks down her cheeks. My phone is dead. I can't call anyone. I can't post anything. What are we going to do? Derek was pacing back and forth, kicking at the pavement. This is illegal, he shouted, though his voice lacked its usual arrogance. I'm going to sue them. I'm going to sue Denise. When I get home, I'm going to ruin her. With what money, Derek? Marcus asked quietly. He was leaning against a concrete pillar, looking defeated. His wrist was bare where his gold watch used to be. The watch he had planned to leave to his grandson if he ever had one. Now it was in the pocket of a restaurant manager, probably being pawned as we spoke. We have nothing, Derek. She took everything. She's the devil. Gloria spat, her eyes wild. She planned this. She waited until we were halfway around the world. How could she do this to her own mother? She did it because we stole from her, Marcus said, his voice flat and tired. He looked at his wife, and for the first time, I think he actually saw her. Not the pious church lady, but the greedy woman who had eaten her own young. We stole her money, Gloria. We stole her house. And now she's taking it back. Shut up, Marcus, Gloria snapped. Don't take her side. She's testing us. This is a test of faith. God will provide. God's not going to send an Uber, Mom, Shayla wailed. We need money. We need a place to sleep. They stood there for an hour. Luxury cars rolled past them. Bentleys and Teslas carrying people who belonged in this world. The valet ignored them. The doorman looked through them. They were invisible. They were debris on the sidewalk of the elite. Finally, Marcus stood up. We can't stay here, he said. The police will come back. Loitering is a crime here too. Where are we going to go? Derek asked, sneering. The airport, Marcus said, picking up his suitcase. It's the only place open 24 hours. Maybe we can plead with the airline. Maybe there's a standby list. They began to walk. No taxi would stop for them because they didn't look like paying customers anymore. They looked like vagrants with expensive luggage. They dragged the heavy bags down the road, the wheels clattering loudly on the pavement. The Remo aluminum I had paid for was getting scuffed and scratched with every step. Dragging through the dust and grit of the road, I sat in my kitchen in Detroit, watching the sun begin to rise through the window. I poured myself another cup of coffee. I didn't need to see them to know what they were doing. I knew my father's practical desperation. I knew my mother's refusal to accept reality. I knew they were walking toward a purgatory of their own making. They were heading to the airport, but they didn't know that their return tickets were already gone. I had canceled them hours ago. When they got to the counter, they wouldn't find a flight home. They would find another bill. I took a sip of coffee and opened a new tab on my laptop. It was time to initiate the next phase. While they were walking through the heat, I was going to make sure that when they finally did crawl back to America, they wouldn't be returning to a home. They would be returning to a fortress that had locked them out. The eviction notice I had taped to the door was just a piece of paper. Now I needed the force of law behind it. I opened the website for the Wayne County Clerk of Courts. It was time to file the emergency motion for possession. I typed in the details. Plaintiff, Karma Holdings LLC. Defendants, Marcus and Gloria Williams. Reason for filing, default on mortgage, abandonment of property, waste of assets. I hit submit. The filing fee was deducted from my account. I leaned back and watched the sunrise. It was going to be a beautiful day in Detroit. In the Maldives, it was a long, dark night of the soul. And they had miles to go before they slept. The pristine marble floors of the Vailana International Airport gleamed under the high-tech lighting, reflecting the sheer panic that had taken over Shayla's face. She stood at the first-class check-in counter, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the desk, staring at the airline agent, who maintained a perfectly polite but pitying smile. The agent repeated the devastating news. Their tickets had been canceled just 2 hours ago. And per the fair rules, the full refund had been processed instantly back to the original form of payment, which belonged to Denise. Shayla felt the blood drain from her face as the reality of the situation crashed down on her like a lead weight. Denise had not only stranded them, but had also reclaimed every single cent she had spent on their luxurious transport. Behind her, Derek was pacing back and forth like a caged animal, his face turning a dangerous shade of red, while her parents huddled together on their luggage, looking small and confused in the middle of the bustling terminal. When Shayla turned around to break the news that they were stranded with absolutely no way home, Derek did not offer comfort or solutions. Instead, the mask of the charming, supportive husband completely dissolved, revealing the ugly, opportunistic nature that had been simmering beneath the surface all along. He got right in her face, not caring about the curious stares from wealthy travelers passing by, and unleashed a torrent of venom that left Shayla reeling. He shouted that he should have known better than to trust a family of frauds, screaming that they were nothing but destitute grifters who had dragged him halfway across the world just to humiliate him. He pointed a shaking finger at Shayla's parents, calling them pathetic parasites who had raised a delusional daughter, and sneered that he had been an idiot to think they had any real class or money without Denise's charity. The insults cut deep, stripping away the last shreds of Shayla's dignity as she realized that the man she thought loved her was only in love with the lifestyle her sister provided. The situation grew more desperate as they checked their bank accounts, only to find them drained from the lavish dinners and shopping sprees they had indulged in during the trip. Assuming the flight home was covered, they had zero liquidity to purchase 4 last-minute international tickets, let alone first-class ones. Desperation clawed at Shayla's throat as she dragged her rolling suitcase toward the high-end duty-free zone, looking for a luxury reseller or a jewelry shop that might take trade-ins. She unclasped the tennis bracelet Derek had given her as an anniversary gift, a symbol of their status and future wealth, and presented it to the appraiser with a trembling hand, hoping it would cover their escape. The humiliation that followed was absolute. The appraiser barely glanced at it through his loupe before handing it back with a dismissive scoff, informing her loud enough for bystanders to hear that he did not purchase costume jewelry. The bracelet was a fake, a cheap knockoff, just like the relationship it represented. Shayla felt tears of shame sting her eyes as she was forced to dig through her bag for the few pieces of real gold jewelry she owned, heirlooms she had planned to keep forever. She sold her earrings, a necklace, and even a ring her grandmother had left her, accepting a fraction of their value because she had no leverage to negotiate. With the wad of cash in hand, she returned to the ticket counter, not the first-class line this time, but the crowded, chaotic economy service desk. The money was only enough for the cheapest, most punishing itinerary available. It was a nightmare route involving 3 different layovers in countries Shayla couldn't even place on a map. With a total travel time of 46 hours sitting in the back of the plane, they sat at the boarding gate for 7 hours, unable to afford the lounge access they were used to, stomachs growling because they didn't have enough spare cash for the overpriced airport food. Derek refused to look at her, sitting 4 seats away with his arms crossed and his eyes closed, radiating pure hatred. Her parents were weeping silently, hungry and terrified, realizing that their golden years were turning into ash because they had bet on the wrong daughter. When the boarding call finally came, they shuffled onto the plane looking disheveled, their expensive clothes wrinkled and stained with sweat, as they squeezed into the cramped middle seats of the economy cabin, knees pressing against the seats in front of them, the air thick with the smell of recycled air and too many bodies. Shayla looked at Derek and her parents. There was no love left in their eyes, only a deep, festering resentment that promised the long journey home would be a torture session of silence and blame. The layover at London Heathrow was a bleak and gray interlude in an already nightmarish journey. As the exhaustion of 22 hours in economy class settled deep into their bones, Shayla sat on a hard metal bench near their departure gate, her eyes swollen and red, while her parents slumped beside her in a daze of fatigue and hunger. Derek was pacing nervously a few yards away, his agitation palpable as he checked his watch every 30 seconds and scanned the terminal with the eyes of a trapped animal. He had spent the entire first leg of the flight ignoring Shayla, refusing to speak to her or her parents. And now, in the sprawling chaos of one of the world's busiest airports, he saw his opportunity to cut his losses. He told Shayla he needed to find a restroom in the upper terminal, claiming the ones nearby were too crowded. But his true intention was far more sinister. He planned to use a hidden credit card he had kept secret to book a solo flight to anywhere but America, leaving the family stranded in the UK. he walked away without looking back, clutching his passport and carry-on bag with a white-knuckled grip, feeling a surge of relief at the thought of escaping the sinking ship that was Shayla's family. He approached the transit security checkpoint, intending to cross into a different terminal where he could disappear into the crowd. But he never made it through the scanner. As he handed his passport to the border agent, a silent alarm triggered on the screen, washing the booth in a soft red glow that went unnoticed by Derek until two uniformed officers stepped out from the shadows. Weeks ago, Denise had sent a detailed anonymous dossier to Derek's ex-wife, revealing his travel itinerary and his location, sending proof that he was spending thousands on luxury travel while owing nearly 6 figures in back child support and alimony. The ex-wife, armed with this information and seething with rage, had filed an international enforcement order, alerting authorities that a flight risk debtor would be passing through London on this specific date. The officers blocked Derek's path with imposing physical presence and informed him that his passport had been flagged by international authorities for significant financial delinquency and flight risk status. Derek tried to laugh it off at first, flashing his signature charming smile and reaching for his wallet to perhaps bribe his way out of a misunderstanding. But the officers were stone-faced and unimpressed when they produced the handcuffs. Derek's composure shattered, and he began to shout, causing a scene that drew the attention of hundreds of weary travelers, including Shayla, who had wandered over to see what was taking him so long. She arrived just in time to see the man she believed was her wealthy savior being pressed against a glass partition, while an officer recited his rights and listed the charges: fraud, abandonment of familial support, and failure to appear in court. Shayla screamed his name, rushing forward, only to be held back by airport security, her hands reaching out uselessly as the reality of who Derek really was crashed into her. He wasn't a rich businessman or a victim of her family's poverty. He was a deadbeat on the run who had been using her to hide from his own failures. As the officers dragged him away, Derek didn't look at Shayla with regret or love. Instead, he looked at her with pure venom, shouting that this was all her fault for dragging him into the spotlight where he could be found. Shayla collapsed to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, her humiliation complete as strangers filmed the breakdown on their phones. Gloria and Marcus arrived moments later, winded from running to catch up, but Gloria did not kneel to comfort her daughter. She looked at the empty space where Derek had been, and then at the boarding clock for their connecting flight to the US, realizing that if they missed this plane, they would be homeless in London. Gloria grabbed Shayla by the arm, her grip bruising and hard, pulling her daughter up from the cold floor with zero maternal warmth. She hissed that Derek was gone, that he was nothing but a criminal liability who would have dragged them down further. So Shayla needed to shut up and walk because they had a home to get back to. They forced Shayla to walk toward the gate, her legs dragging as she wept for the loss of the engagement ring she had sold, the wedding she would never have, and the man who had turned out to be a mirage. They boarded the final flight as a broken trio, the seat next to Shayla empty, a gaping reminder of her foolishness. As the plane lifted off the tarmac, leaving Derek in a holding cell in London, Shayla stared out the window into the darkness, terrified of what awaited them in America, but clinging to the one hope that at least they still had their house. The yellow taxi idled for a moment at the curb, its headlights cutting through the sheets of rain that hammered down on the quiet suburban street like biblical judgment. It was 11 o'clock at night, and the storm had turned the familiar neighborhood into a gray, watery blur. Gloria, Marcus, and Shayla scrambled out of the cab, dragging their luggage from the trunk with frantic, jerky movements. They were instantly soaked, their clothes clinging to their shivering bodies, water running in rivulets down their faces, mixing with the grime of 48 hours of budget travel. The taxi peeled away, taillights vanishing into the mist, leaving them standing before the house that was supposed to be their sanctuary, their finish line after the marathon of humiliation they had endured. They ran up the driveway, splashing through puddles, desperate for warmth and the familiar smell of home. They huddled onto the front porch, the overhang offering only meager protection from the wind that whipped the rain sideways. Marcus, his hands shaking violently from cold and exhaustion, fumbled in his pocket for his keys. He jammed the brass key toward the lock, his mind already anticipating the click of the tumbler and the swing of the door, but metal struck plastic with a dull thud. He frowned, wiping water from his eyes, and looked closer. The brass handle he had touched every day for 20 years was gone. In its place was a sleek black panel with a glowing blue ring and a fingerprint scanner. Looking more like the entrance to a high-security vault than a family home, he tried to jam the key into the side, thinking there must be a manual override. But there was nothing. The door was a smooth, impenetrable slab of technology. Panic flared in Gloria's chest, hot and immediate. She assumed Denise had done something petty, changed the locks to be difficult. Or perhaps the girl was just deep asleep and hadn't heard them arrive. She began to pound on the door with her fist, the sound heavy and desperate, against the wood. She screamed Denise's name, her voice cracking, demanding that her daughter open the door this instant. Shayla joined in, shivering and miserable, kicking the bottom of the door and shouting that she was freezing. They made a scene that would have embarrassed them if they weren't so desperate, banging and yelling, convinced that their ungrateful servant of a daughter was inside, warm and dry, ignoring their plight. They felt entitled to that warmth, believing that no matter what had happened, this structure and the person inside it existed to serve them. Suddenly, the blue light on the lock turned green, not because it recognized them, but because it had been disengaged from the inside. The heavy door swung inward. Gloria lunged forward, ready to scream at Denise for the delay, ready to unload all the frustration of the trip onto her scapegoat, but she stopped dead, her breath catching in her throat. The hallway was brightly lit, but the figure blocking the entrance was not Denise. It was a man, broad-shouldered and imposing, wearing a dark uniform, with a tactical belt and a security badge gleaming on his chest. He filled the doorway completely, looking down at the three soaking wet, disheveled people with the impassive stare of a statue. Gloria stammered, water dripping from her nose, asking who he was and what he was doing in her house. She tried to peer around him, calling out for Denise again, her voice shrill with confusion. The guard did not move. He stated in a deep, flat voice that this was a private residence owned by Karma Holdings and that they were trespassing. He informed them that the previous occupants had been evicted by court order for breach of contract and abandonment of the property. He held up a hand to stop Gloria as she tried to argue, his palm like a stop sign. He told them calmly that they needed to leave the premises immediately, or he would be forced to call the police for trespassing. The words bounced off Gloria's brain without sinking in. Karma Holdings, eviction. This was her house. Her furniture was inside. Her life was inside. The realization began to dawn on her, horrifying and slow, that the paperwork she had signed without reading, the loan she had let Denise handle, had been a trap. She tried to push past the guard, hysteria taking over. She screamed that it was her house, that her child was inside, that they couldn't do this. The guard stepped forward, using his bulk to force them back onto the wet steps, and firmly closed the door. The electronic lock engaged with a final mechanical whir that sounded like a prison cell slamming shut. Gloria threw herself at the wood, sliding down to her knees in the rain, beating her hands against the unyielding surface. She howled into the storm, screaming that her child was in there, unaware that the child she was screaming for was miles away, watching the feed on her phone, sipping wine in a silence that was finally beautifully hers. The heavy oak door clicked open again, cutting through the sound of the storm and silencing Gloria's hysterical screaming. The massive security guard stepped aside, not to let them in, but to clear the view for the figure standing behind him in the warm, golden glow of the foyer. It was Denise. She looked nothing like the quiet, downtrodden scapegoat they had left behind weeks ago to guard their house. She was dressed in an immaculate, sharp, tailored suit that looked like it cost more than Shayla's entire wardrobe. Her hair was perfectly styled in elegant locks, and her makeup was flawless. She held a crystal wine glass loosely in one hand, swirling the dark red liquid as she looked down at her shivering, soaked family with an expression of mild amusement, as if she were watching a reality TV show that had taken a boring turn. The sight of her daughter looking so regal while she knelt in the mud snapped the last thread of Gloria's sanity. With a feral shriek of rage, she scrambled up the wet stairs, her fingers curled into claws, aiming straight for Denise's face. She didn't get within 3 feet. The security guard moved with terrifying speed, his arm shooting out like a barrier of iron, catching Gloria by the shoulder and shoving her back down the steps with effortless force. She stumbled and fell hard onto the wet concrete of the walkway, gasping for air, the physical rejection mirroring the legal one she was about to face. Denise didn't even flinch. She didn't spill a drop of her wine, She took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the moment, before speaking in a voice that cut through the sound of the rain like a razor blade. "Welcome home," she said, her tone dripping with ice. "Oh, wait, I forgot. You don't have a home anymore." She reached into the entryway table and picked up a thick, bound stack of documents. She didn't hand them over politely. Instead, she tossed them casually into the air. The papers fluttered down like dead leaves, landing in the puddles gathering on the porch. The ink immediately beginning to blur under the relentless downpour. "These are the loan documents you signed to fund your little Prince Derek's lifestyle," Denise explained, watching her father scramble on his hands and knees to save the wet pages. "You leveraged this house to the hilt to pay for first-class tickets and designer luggage because you thought he was rich enough to pay it off. You defaulted 6 months ago." She pointed to a document soaking in a muddy puddle near Shayla's feet. "And this proves that Karma Holdings purchased your distressed mortgage from the bank." "I didn't just pay your bills this time, Mother. I bought your debt. I own the paper, the bricks, and the land you're trespassing on." Shayla, shivering violently, looked up with wide, disbelief-filled eyes, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. "You stole it," she screamed, her voice shrill and childish. "You stole our house. You're a thief." Denise threw her head back and laughed, a cold, genuine sound that echoed down the quiet street. "I didn't steal anything, Shayla. I saved this house from the foreclosure auction block the bank had already scheduled. I saved the asset, but I didn't do it to save you." The commotion on the front lawn had done exactly what Denise hoped it would. Porch lights across the street flickered on. Curtains were pulled back. Despite the rain, neighbors began to step out onto their porches, drawn by the spectacle of the neighborhood's most pretentious family having a meltdown. Gloria, seeing an audience, tried to pivot. She scrambled to her feet, throwing her arms out to the neighbors, wailing that her daughter was abusing her, that she was being thrown out into the cold by an ungrateful child she had raised with love. She tried to invoke the sympathy of the community she had spent years trying to impress. Playing the victim card she had used her entire life, Denise stepped out onto the porch. Ignoring the rain, spotting her expensive suit, she raised her voice, projecting it clearly to the gathering crowd. "Raised with love?" she challenged, her voice ringing with authority. "Is that what you call opening 6 credit cards in my name when I was 13 years old?" The neighbors gasped, the murmur of shock rippling through the dark. Gloria froze, her mouth open, her eyes darting around wildly. "You ruined my credit score before I was old enough to get a learner's permit," Denise continued relentlessly. "You committed federal identity theft against your own child to buy furniture for this house and clothes for Shayla. I spent 12 years paying off your fraud. Tonight is just the collection agency finally coming to call." Gloria looked around, hoping for a friendly face, but the neighbors were staring at her with undisguised disgust. The facade of the perfect suburban matriarch crumbled instantly, leaving her naked in her shame. She stood there, drenched, homeless, and exposed as a thief and a failure. Denise turned her gaze slowly toward her sister, who was shivering violently in the mud, her expensive designer clothes ruined and clinging to her frame like a second skin. The silence that followed the revelation about the credit card fraud was thick and heavy. But Denise was not finished yet. She had one more devastating card to play against the golden child who had tormented her for years. She took another sip of her wine, her eyes locking onto Shayla with a predator's focus, and asked with mock innocence why Prince Charming was not standing there beside his princess. She let the question hang in the wet air for a moment before delivering the answer with surgical precision. "Derek is likely quite busy at the moment, explaining to the British authorities why he has 3 secret children and a history of wire fraud that spans 2 continents. I took the liberty of forwarding the entire dossier of his secret life to your email, including the explicit chat logs from the escorts he was hiring while you were busy planning a wedding that was never going to happen." The notification ping on Shayla's phone seemed to echo like a gunshot in the quiet street. As she fumbled with wet fingers to open the message, the blue light of the screen illuminated a face that was crumbling into absolute despair. The images and documents loaded one by one, dismantling the fantasy world Shayla had built her entire identity around, proving that the man she worshipped was nothing more than a predator who had played her for a fool. Shayla dropped the phone into a puddle, her legs giving out as she collapsed into the mud, letting out a wail of pure anguish that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with the death of her delusion. She sat there in the dirt, realizing she was not a princess. She was not rich. She was just a victim of her own vanity, and she had lost absolutely everything, watching his family disintegrate into a pile of wet defeat. Marcus finally broke the silence he had maintained for decades. The man who had always stood tall as the patriarch suddenly looked small and withered as he dropped to his knees on the slick concrete of the walkway. Heedless of the pain or the humiliation, he clasped his hands together, looking up at Denise with eyes full of tears, and begged her to stop this madness, asking her to remember that he was her father. Pleading for just one night of shelter from the storm, he apologized for everything, his voice cracking, claiming that they had learned their lesson, and begging her to open the door. Denise looked down at the man kneeling before her and felt absolutely nothing. Not pity, not anger, just a cold, hollow indifference. She reminded him, in a voice devoid of emotion, that he had stood in that exact spot 12 years ago, watching silently while her mother threw her clothes onto the lawn and locked her out. He had said nothing then. He had done nothing to protect his child. He had chosen his comfort over her safety. She told him that she was simply returning the favor, standing by and watching him face the consequences of his choices. Because fair was fair, and the universe was finally balancing the scales, she told him that looking at him now, she did not see a father. She saw a coward who deserved every drop of rain that was falling on him. Blue and red lights suddenly cut through the darkness, painting the rain in strobing colors as a patrol car pulled up to the curb, its tires crunching on the wet asphalt. Denise had called them 15 minutes ago, predicting exactly how this confrontation would end. Two officers stepped out of the vehicle, their hands resting on their belts as they approached the scene, asking if there was a problem. Denise smiled politely at the officers, gesturing to the three people huddled on her walkway, and informed the police that these strangers were trespassing on her private property and refusing to leave despite being asked multiple times. As the officers moved in to escort the sobbing, screaming family off the premises, Denise turned her back on them, walking into her warm, brightly lit home and closing the door with a final, satisfying click that shut out the noise, the rain, and the past forever. 6 months had passed since the gavel fell in the courtroom, and the seasons had turned, shifting from the bleak gray of winter into the vibrant, hopeful warmth of early summer. The old mansion that had once been a stage for her family's dysfunctional theater had undergone a metamorphosis that mirrored Denise's own transformation. She had not simply sold the property, she had purged it, stripping the interior down to its studs and removing every trace of the pretension and bad taste that Gloria had filled it with. Where there had once been gaudy chandeliers and overpriced velvet, there was now clean, modern lines and sunlit open spaces. The real estate market had responded with a bidding war that drove the price to dizzying heights. And when Denise finally signed the closing documents, she sold the renovated masterpiece for exactly triple what she had paid for the distressed mortgage. The profit was not just financial gain. It was tangible, quantifiable proof of her competence, a final repudiation of every time her parents had called her useless. With the capital from the sale sitting securely in her bank account, Denise did not go on a spending spree or book a flight to a private island. Instead, she reinvested in her vision. She leased a bright, airy office space in the financial district and placed a sleek silver plaque on the door that read Sovereign Financial Strategies. It was a boutique firm, dedicated exclusively to helping women secure their financial independence, protecting them from the kind of economic abuse and coercion she had survived. Every day she sat across from clients who were waking up to the reality of their own power, teaching them how to build credit, how to invest, and how to ensure that no one could ever lock them out of their own lives again. The work was exhausting, but it fed her soul in a way that seeking approval from her family never had, replacing the hollow ache in her chest with a solid core of purpose. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the city skies opened up, unleashing a torrential downpour that turned the streets into rivers of gray slush. Denise was driving her new car, a vehicle she had bought with her own money, solely because she loved the way it handled the curves of the city streets. The interior smelled of rich leather and quiet luxury, a sanctuary from the chaos outside as the windshield wipers beat a steady, rhythmic tempo against the glass. She was heading toward a meeting on the other side of town, a route that unfortunately took her past the sprawling shopping complex where Shaylin now spent her days. Denise usually avoided this street, preferring not to see the physical reminders of her past. But today, the detour was unavoidable due to construction. As her car idled at a red light, the rain drumming against the roof. She glanced to her right toward the bus stop that serviced the low-income route heading back toward the subsidized housing district. Through the mist and the spray of passing traffic, she saw two figures huddled under the cracked plastic shelter, trying in vain to escape the wind. It took a moment for her brain to reconcile the image, because they looked so small, so incredibly diminished. Gloria was clutching a reusable grocery bag to her chest, her once perfectly coiffed hair, now thin and gray, plastered to her skull by the rain, her face etched with deep lines of bitterness and exhaustion that no amount of drugstore cream could hide. Standing next to her was Shayla, still wearing her gray work uniform from the janitorial service. Shivering as she tried to use her body to shield her mother from the splashing puddles, Shayla looked up as the line of cars waited, and for a split second, her eyes seemed to lock onto Denise's silhouette through the tinted glass. There was no recognition, just the dull, vacant stare of someone whose spirit had been broken by the relentless grind of survival. Denise felt her foot hover over the brake pedal, a phantom reflex from a lifetime of being trained to fix their problems, to be the safety net they abused. She could stop. She could roll down the window, unlock the doors, and let them into the warmth. She could write a check that would solve their immediate misery, just as she had done 1,000 times before. The old Denise, the one who craved a crumb of their affection, would have done exactly that, but the woman sitting in the driver's seat was not that person anymore. She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror, seeing the sharp, intelligent eyes of a survivor who knew the cost of mercy. She reached into her purse and pulled out a tube of deep red lipstick, the color of confidence and power. With a steady hand, she applied a fresh coat, watching her own lips curve into a small, resolved smile. She capped the lipstick and placed it back in her bag, her movements deliberate and final. The light turned green. Denise did not look right again. She pressed the accelerator, feeling the surge of the engine as the car propelled her forward, away from the bus stop, away from the rain, and away from the ghosts of the people who had tried to consume her. As the city blurred past her window, her voice was calm and steady, echoing in the quiet cabin of the car, carrying a truth she had paid a high price to learn. They say that blood is thicker than water, implying that family bonds are sacred and unbreakable, no matter the cost. But I say that a bill is a bill. When you pay off cruelty in full, when you settle the debt of years of abuse, the receipt you receive in return is not guilt, and it is not obligation. The receipt is freedom. And I have finally paid my balance in full. This story illustrates that shared DNA does not entitle anyone to your dignity or resources. Denise's journey proves that true freedom relies on financial independence and the courage to enforce boundaries, even against family. It teaches us that blood is thicker than water is often a manipulation tool used by those who exploit us. Ultimately, you cannot save people who are determined to destroy you. Sometimes the healthiest choice is walking away to save yourself. The fluorescent lights of the high-rise law office hummed with a sterile coldness that matched the atmosphere in the conference room where the final act of this family tragedy was taking place. Exactly 2 months after the eviction, Denise sat at the head of the mahogany table, looking immaculate in a charcoal business dress, her hands folded calmly over a leather portfolio, while her family sat opposite her, looking like ghosts of their former selves. Gloria and Marcus wore clothes that were wrinkled and ill-fitting, clearly salvaged from the few bags they had been allowed to keep, while Shayla stared at the floor, her roots showing, and her face stripped of the expensive makeup she used to hide behind. The silence was thick and suffocating, broken only by the rustling of papers as Denise's attorney slid a heavy stack of documents across the polished wood surface toward the trembling parents. Gloria looked at the papers with watery eyes, fully expecting them to be criminal charges for the identity theft she had committed years ago against her own daughter. She had spent the last 60 days in a state of terror, waiting for the police to knock on the motel door where they had been staying, using the last of their cash. But Denise had a different kind of punishment in mind. Denise leaned forward and spoke with a voice devoid of warmth, explaining that she had decided not to pursue criminal charges for the credit card fraud because sending Gloria to prison would be a waste of taxpayer money. And Denise refused to spend another dime supporting her mother, even indirectly through the penal system. Gloria let out a sob of relief, but it was premature because Denise raised a hand to silence her, revealing the cost of this mercy. The condition for her silence was total and absolute surrender. requiring them to sign a binding legal agreement that relinquished any and all claims to the family home, the furniture, and any future inheritance or assets connected to Denise. They were signing away their past and their future. Acknowledging that they had no rights to the wealth they had tried to steal, Marcus picked up the pen with a shaking hand. His pride completely evaporated as he realized that this signature was the final admission of his failure as a father and a provider. He signed his name, followed by Gloria, who wept silently as she signed away the last remnants of the status she had worshipped for so long. Then Denise turned her attention to Shayla, who had remained silent, hoping to fade into the background. Denise signaled her lawyer, who produced a separate file containing high-resolution images printed from the security footage of the hotel in the Maldives. Along with copies of receipts, Denise explained that during their lavish shopping sprees, Shayla had been the one to physically sign for the purchases on the credit cards, assuming Denise would foot the bill. Since the original bookings were refunded and the cards used for the shopping were technically unauthorized by the account holder, Denise had successfully transferred the liability for the $68,000 of luxury goods directly to the person who signed for them. The debt was now, legally, Shayla's loan, a crushing financial burden that she had no means to pay. The meeting ended not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a briefcase latch as Denise stood up and walked out, leaving her family with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a lifetime of debt. 3,000 miles away, in a cold, gray detention facility in London, Derek Miller sat on a metal bench in an orange jumpsuit, waiting for his extradition hearing. The British authorities had held him for 6 weeks while the paperwork processed, and now he was being transferred back to Wisconsin to face multiple counts of felony child support evasion and fraud. His 3 ex-wives had formed an alliance, pooling their resources to hire a prosecutor who specialized in deadbeat parent cases. The evidence Denise had provided: the flight confirmations, the luxury hotel receipts, the photos of him living large while his children went without had made the case airtight. Derek's public defender had already told him that he was looking at a minimum of 4 years in state prison, possibly 6, if the judge wanted to make an example of him. There would be no plea deal. The mothers wanted blood. In his cell at night, Derek replayed the moment at Heathrow Airport when the officers had grabbed him. He had been so close to freedom, so close to disappearing into Canada or Mexico with the fake passport he had purchased on the dark web, but Denise had been 3 steps ahead of him. She had always been 3 steps ahead. He thought about Shayla, and he felt nothing. Not love, not guilt, just annoyance that she had been the one to drag him into visibility. If they had just stayed small, stayed quiet, he could have continued to hide, but they had to go big. They had to go to the Maldives. They had to flaunt it on social media. And now he was paying the price. The irony was not lost on him. He had spent years running from his responsibilities, only to be caught because he tried to live like a rich man on someone else's dime. As the guards came to take him to the transport van that would begin his journey back to America, Derek realized that he had been right about one thing: Denise was the smartest person in that family, and he had been a fool to underestimate her. 2 days later, the reality of their new life set in as Gloria and Marcus moved into a small, cramped apartment in a state-subsidized housing complex on the edge of Detroit, where the walls were thin and the air smelled permanently of stale cooking oil and damp mildew. Gloria sat on a second-hand mattress, staring at the peeling paint on the ceiling, realizing that she would spend her twilight years listening to the arguments of neighbors through paper-thin walls. Far away from the country clubs and garden parties she had once lived for, the apartment had 1 bedroom, which they gave to Shayla because she was the one still working. Gloria and Marcus slept on a pull-out couch in the living room, their bodies aching from the cheap springs and lack of support. Every morning, Marcus would wake up at 5 a.m., dress in clothes from Goodwill, and take the bus to his new job as a part-time security guard at a strip mall. At 72 years old, he stood on his feet for 8 hours a day, watching teenagers shoplift and dealing with belligerent customers. Earning $11 an hour. It was humiliating work, but it was the only job he could get. With no recent work history and a resume gap that screamed retired and desperate, Gloria tried to maintain her dignity by volunteering at the church, but even that became a source of shame. The other church ladies, the ones she used to look down on, now whispered behind her back. They knew what had happened. The neighborhood gossip network had made sure everyone knew that Gloria Williams had been exposed as a fraud and a thief. She stopped wearing her fancy hats. She stopped hosting Bible studies. She became invisible, a cautionary tale whispered in church basements about the dangers of pride and greed. Shayla's fate was even more visceral. The crushing weight of the debt forced her to take on 2 jobs. During the day, she worked as a janitor at the shopping mall, pushing a heavy cart filled with cleaning supplies. Her hands raw from harsh chemicals. As she navigated the food court, she used to look down upon at night. She worked the graveyard shift at a 24-hour gas station, standing behind bulletproof glass, selling cigarettes and lottery tickets to insomniacs and addicts. When a group of young women came into the mall, laughing and shopping with their mothers, Shayla had to turn away, fighting back tears. That had been her life once. She had been the girl with the designer bags and the Instagram following. Now she was the woman scrubbing toilets and praying. No one recognized her. One day, a former follower did recognize her. The girl took a photo and posted it with the caption, "Karma is real, y'all. Remember that influencer who used to flex on us? She's literally mopping floors now." The post went viral. Shayla deleted all her social media accounts that night, unable to face the mockery and schadenfreude. The family had lost more than just their material possessions. They had lost the intangible currency of honor and respect that they had valued above all else. They were stripped bare, exposed as frauds and failures, forced to live in the wreckage of their own hubris. But the greatest loss was not the house or the money or the status. It was the realization that they had alienated the one person in the world who had the strength and the intelligence to save them. Denise was gone, living her life in the light. While they were left to rot in the shadows, they had cast themselves into a darkness of their own making that no amount of dreaming could ever lift them out of. 1 year after the eviction, Denise stood in the conference room of her firm, Sovereign Financial Strategies, looking out over the Detroit skyline. The office had grown from a single room to a full floor, employing 12 staff members, all women, all survivors of financial abuse. They had helped over 300 clients in the past year, teaching them how to protect their assets, how to recognize the warning signs of exploitation, and how to build wealth that no one could take from them. Denise had been featured in Forbes, in Black Enterprise, and on a panel at a women's financial empowerment conference in New York. She had become a voice for a generation of women who refused to be silenced or stolen from. Her story, the story of a daughter who took back her power from a toxic family, had resonated with thousands. She received emails every day from women thanking her for showing them that it was okay to set boundaries. Even with blood relatives, she had started a scholarship fund for young Black women pursuing careers in law and finance, fully funding 10 students per year through graduate school. It was named the Gloria Williams Memorial Scholarship, a pointed reminder that her mother's legacy would not be theft and manipulation, but the education and empowerment of the daughters who came after. Denise had also started dating again. She met a man named Julian, a civil rights attorney who respected her boundaries and admired her strength. He didn't need her money. He didn't need her to save him. He was her equal, her partner, her choice. They were taking it slow, building something real, something healthy, something her mother had told her she would never have. On the anniversary of the eviction, Denise received a letter in the mail. It was from her father. The handwriting was shaky. The paper cheap. It was an apology, a real one. Marcus wrote that he had been a coward, that he had failed her, and that he understood why she had done what she did. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply said that he was proud of the woman she had become, and that he was sorry he had not been strong enough to protect her when it mattered. Denise read the letter 3 times. She cried, not because she forgave him, but because she finally had closure. Her father had acknowledged the truth, and that was all she needed. She folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. She would not respond. There was nothing left to say, but she kept it. A reminder that even broken people can sometimes find clarity in the ruins of their mistakes. The final lesson came on a cold December evening, 2 years after the reckoning began. Denise was invited to speak at a TEDx event in Chicago, sharing her story with an audience of 2,000 people. She stood on the red circle, the spotlight warm on her face, and she told them everything. She told them about the identity theft, about the stolen mortgage payments, about the moment she realized her family saw her as a bank account instead of a daughter, and she told them what she learned. Freedom, she said. her voice steady and strong, is not free. It costs you something. Sometimes it costs you everything. I lost my family. I lost the people I had spent my entire life trying to please. But in exchange, I gained something infinitely more valuable. I gained myself. They say blood is thicker than water, but that phrase has been twisted. The full saying is, the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It means that the bonds you choose, the people who earn your loyalty through love and respect, are stronger than the bonds you are born into. My family taught me that DNA does not entitle anyone to your dignity, your resources, or your future. You do not owe anyone access to your peace just because they share your last name, and if you are in a situation where you are being used, abused, or exploited by people who claim to love you, I want you to hear this. You are not selfish for protecting yourself. You are not cruel for setting boundaries. You are not a bad person for walking away. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their actions, not to punish them, but to free yourself. I paid off my debt to my family in full, and the receipt I received was not guilt. It was freedom, and I have never been richer. The audience erupted in applause. People stood. Some were crying. Denise looked out at the sea of faces, women and men who understood, who had been there, who were still fighting their way out. She smiled. She had told her story. She had turned her pain into purpose. And she had built a life that was entirely, beautifully her own. As she walked off the stage, her phone buzzed with a message from Julian. You were incredible. Dinner when you get back? Denise typed back. Absolutely. I'll be home soon. Home. Not a house filled with ghosts and debts, but a life she had chosen, built on her own terms, with people who saw her as a person, not a resource. She put her phone away and walked into the cold Chicago night. The city lights reflecting off the snow, feeling lighter than she had in years. The reckoning was over. The freedom had begun, and Denise Williams was finally, completely, beautifully free.